Sarah Mitchell never imagined that her evening jog through the quiet streets of San Diego would turn into a fight for her life. The 32-year-old Navy SEAL had just completed another grueling day of training at Naval Special Warfare Command, and the familiar rhythm of her running shoes against the pavement usually helped clear her mind. Tonight felt different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. The sun had set an hour ago, casting long shadows between the streetlights that lined the residential neighborhood. Sarah preferred running at night when the California heat subsided and the streets emptied of traffic. Her route took her through a mix of middle-class homes and small businesses, a path she had traveled hundreds of times over the past 3 years since being stationed in San Diego. As she rounded the corner onto Maple Street, Sarah noticed a black sedan parked awkwardly across 2 parking spaces near the entrance to a small convenience store. The engine was running, and she could see the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat. Her training kicked in automatically, heightening her awareness as she assessed the situation. Something about the scene triggered her instincts, though she couldn't immediately identify what felt wrong. The convenience store, Kim's Market, was owned by an elderly Korean couple who had been serving the neighborhood for over 15 years. Sarah often stopped there after her runs to buy water or grab a healthy snack. She knew the Kims worked late, usually closing around 10 o'clock, and it was only 8:30 now. The store's neon signs were still glowing, indicating it should be open for business. Sarah slowed her pace as she approached the storefront, her eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. The front windows were covered with advertising posters for lottery tickets and beer specials, making it difficult to see inside. She could hear muffled voices coming from within the store, but the tone seemed agitated rather than conversational. Her phone buzzed in her armband, displaying a text from her teammate Jake asking about their training schedule for tomorrow. Sarah ignored it for now, focusing instead on the situation unfolding before her. She had learned during her SEAL training that trusting her instincts often meant the difference between life and death, and, right now, every instinct was telling her something was very wrong. The voices inside the store grew louder, and Sarah could now distinguish between at least 3 different speakers. One voice was higher pitched and sounded frightened, likely Mrs. Kim. Another was deeper and more aggressive, clearly making demands. The third voice was younger, possibly a teenager, and seemed to be pleading or crying. Sarah moved closer to the storefront, using the parked cars as cover while she tried to get a better view of what was happening inside. Through a gap in the window advertisements, she could see the back of a tall man wearing a dark hoodie. He was standing near the counter, and his posture suggested he was holding something in his hands, though she couldn't see what it was from her angle. The training that had been drilled into her during SEAL school emphasized the importance of gathering intelligence before taking action. Sarah needed more information about the number of suspects, their weapons, and the exact nature of the threat before deciding how to proceed. She circled around to the side of the building, where a small alley provided better cover and a different vantage point. From this new position, Sarah could see through the store's side window more clearly. The scene inside made her blood run cold. 2 men, both wearing hoodies and baseball caps pulled low over their faces, were confronting the Kim family behind the counter. One of the men was pointing what appeared to be a handgun at Mr. Kim, while the other was rifling through the cash register. Mrs. Kim was standing beside her husband, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender, tears streaming down her face. Their teenage grandson, who sometimes helped in the store after school, was crouched behind the counter, clearly terrified. The boy couldn't have been more than 16 years old, and Sarah could see him shaking from where she stood. The situation was escalating quickly. The man with the gun was becoming more agitated, waving the weapon erratically as he shouted demands. Sarah couldn't hear the exact words, but his body language suggested he was growing impatient with how slowly the robbery was proceeding. The second suspect had apparently encountered some difficulty with the cash register and was becoming increasingly frustrated. Sarah reached for her phone to call 911, then hesitated. By the time police arrived, the situation could have deteriorated significantly. The suspects might panic and hurt the Kim family, or they might flee with hostages. Her SEAL training had prepared her for exactly these kinds of high-stress scenarios where innocent lives were at stake. She assessed her options quickly and methodically. The store had two main entrances, the front door, which would put her in full view of both suspects, and a rear entrance that employees used for deliveries. Sarah had noticed this back door during her previous visits to the store, though she had never paid it much attention until now. Moving carefully through the alley, Sarah made her way to the rear of the building. The back door was partially obscured by stacked cardboard boxes and a small dumpster, providing natural cover. She tested the door handle gently and found it unlocked, likely because the Kims used it to take out trash throughout the evening. Before entering, Sarah took a moment to center herself and run through the tactical principles that had been beaten into her during training. She needed to identify all threats, protect the innocent civilians, and neutralize the danger with minimal risk to everyone involved. The cramped confines of the convenience store would make this particularly challenging, as there was little room for maneuvering and a high risk of collateral damage. Sarah slowly opened the back door just enough to slip inside. The rear of the store was cluttered with inventory and supplies, providing excellent concealment as she moved toward the front. She could now hear the conversation more clearly, and what she heard made her realize the situation was even more dangerous than she had initially thought. The man with the gun was not just robbing the store, he was making increasingly violent threats against the Kim family. His language was crude and threatening, and he seemed to be enjoying the terror he was causing. The second suspect was encouraging this behavior, making jokes about what they might do to Mrs. Kim if the family didn't cooperate more quickly. Sarah's jaw tightened as she listened to the threats. These weren't desperate criminals looking for quick cash, they were predators who were taking pleasure in terrorizing an innocent family. The distinction mattered because it changed how she would need to approach the situation. Desperate criminals might be reasoned with or scared off, but predators would need to be stopped by force. Moving with the silent precision that had been drilled into her during countless training exercises, Sarah positioned herself behind a display of motor oil bottles where she could observe the entire scene. The layout of the store was now clear to her. The two suspects were standing in front of the counter, with about 15 feet of open space between them and her position. The Kim family was trapped behind the counter with no means of escape. The man with the gun was holding what appeared to be a Glock pistol, a weapon Sarah was intimately familiar with from her military service. He was gripping it properly, suggesting he had at least basic familiarity with firearms, but his stance and movements indicated he was not professionally trained. The second suspect appeared to be unarmed, at least as far as Sarah could determine from her vantage point. Sarah's mind raced through various tactical scenarios. She could attempt to disarm the gunman from behind, but the risk to the hostages was significant if the plan failed. She could try to distract the suspects and give the Kim family a chance to escape, but the store's layout made that unlikely to succeed. The most reliable option seemed to be neutralizing both threats simultaneously, but that would require perfect timing and execution. The situation took a dangerous turn when the teenage boy behind the counter accidentally knocked over a display of candy bars while trying to move away from the threatening criminals. The sound startled the gunman, who spun around wildly, his weapon sweeping across the store in an arc that included Sarah's position. For a split second, the gunman's eyes met Sarah's through the gap in the motor oil display. Time seemed to freeze as both of them processed what was happening. The criminal's face showed surprise and confusion, while Sarah's expression remained calm and focused despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The gunman's mouth opened to shout a warning to his partner, but Sarah was already in motion. Years of training had conditioned her to react instantly when a tactical situation developed, and she moved with the fluid precision of someone who had practiced similar scenarios hundreds of times in both training environments and real-world operations. Sarah launched herself forward, covering the 15 feet between her position and the gunman in less than 2 seconds. The element of surprise was crucial in close-quarters combat, and she had learned to maximize every advantage when lives were on the line. Her approach angle was calculated to keep the Kim family out of the line of fire while simultaneously preventing the second suspect from immediately joining the fight. The gunman was still trying to process what was happening when Sarah's shoulder drove into his midsection, sending him stumbling backward into a display of snack foods. The impact knocked the wind out of him and caused him to lose his grip on the pistol, which clattered across the floor toward the refrigerated drinks section. The second suspect finally realized what was happening and moved to help his partner, but Sarah was ready for him. As she had learned during hand-to-hand combat training, controlling multiple opponents required constant movement and aggression to prevent them from coordinating their attacks against her. Sarah pivoted from her position over the first gunman and drove her elbow into the second suspect's solar plexus, doubling him over in pain. Before he could recover, she grabbed him by the shoulders and drove her knee upward into his face, producing a sickening crunch as his nose broke. Blood began flowing immediately, and the suspect staggered backward, clutching his face and groaning in pain. The first gunman was beginning to recover from the initial impact and was scrambling toward where his weapon had fallen. Sarah couldn't allow him to regain control of the firearm, so she pursued him across the store, her running shoes finding purchase on the linoleum floor even as she navigated around displays and merchandise. The gunman reached the pistol just as Sarah reached him. He was lying on his stomach, stretching his arm toward the weapon, when Sarah's boot came down hard on his wrist. The sound of breaking bone was audible throughout the store, and the man screamed in agony as his hand went limp. Behind the counter, the Kim family watched in amazement as the young woman who had been a regular customer transformed into a highly trained warrior before their eyes. Mr. Kim had already reached for the phone to call the police, while Mrs. Kim gathered her grandson protectively in her arms. Sarah wasn't finished yet. Both suspects were injured but still potentially dangerous, and she needed to secure them until law enforcement arrived. The second suspect was still standing, though he was swaying unsteadily and blood continued to flow from his broken nose. His eyes showed a mixture of pain, confusion, and growing anger as he realized their easy robbery had turned into a nightmare. The suspect with the broken nose wiped blood from his face and glared at Sarah with undisguised hatred. Despite his injuries, he was still much larger than her, and she could see him calculating whether he could overpower her through brute force. Sarah recognized the look and prepared herself for another assault. What the suspect didn't understand was that size and strength meant very little against someone trained in the precise application of violence. Sarah had learned to use an opponent's aggression against them, redirecting their energy while simultaneously attacking their most vulnerable points. Every move she made was designed to end the fight as quickly as possible with minimal risk to herself and the innocent bystanders. The bleeding suspect lunged toward Sarah with his arms outstretched, hoping to tackle her to the ground where his size advantage might prove decisive. Sarah sidestepped the clumsy attack and used his momentum against him, grabbing his extended arm and using a textbook hip throw to send him crashing into the checkout counter. The impact of his body against the solid counter knocked several items to the floor and left the suspect dazed and gasping for breath. Sarah immediately followed up by applying a chokehold that would render him unconscious in seconds if he continued to resist. The pressure she applied was precise and controlled, designed to subdue without causing permanent injury. The suspect struggled briefly but quickly realized he was completely outmatched. As consciousness began to fade due to the restriction of blood flow to his brain, he tapped frantically on Sarah's arm in submission. She maintained the hold for 2 more seconds to ensure he was truly surrendering, then released him and stepped back. Both suspects were now neutralized and no longer posed a threat to the Kim family or to Sarah herself. The first gunman was clutching his broken wrist and moaning softly, while the second was barely conscious after being choked out. Sarah retrieved the dropped pistol and checked to ensure it was properly secured before turning her attention to the hostages. The Kim family was safe but clearly traumatized by what they had. The first police cruiser arrived within 3 minutes of Mr. Kim's call, its red and blue lights casting dancing shadows across the convenience store's interior. Officer Martinez stepped through the front door with his weapon drawn, expecting to find an active robbery in progress. Instead, he discovered 2 injured suspects lying on the floor and a calm young woman standing near the counter with a pistol held safely in her hands. Sarah immediately identified herself and slowly placed the weapon on the counter, keeping her movements deliberate and visible to avoid any misunderstandings with the responding officers. Her military training had included extensive instruction on how to interact with law enforcement during crisis situations, and she knew that officers arriving at an active scene would be operating under high stress and maximum alertability. Officer Martinez quickly assessed the scene while his partner, Officer Chen, secured the two suspects who were still groaning on the floor. The broken wrist of the first gunman was already beginning to swell, while the second suspect's face was a mess of blood from his shattered nose. Both men were conscious but clearly in no condition to pose further threats. Sarah provided a concise but thorough account of what had transpired, describing how she had witnessed the robbery in progress and made the decision to intervene when it became clear the suspects were making increasingly violent threats against the Kim family. She explained her military background and training without going into unnecessary detail about classified operations or specific techniques. The responding officers were professional but clearly surprised by what they had encountered. Armed robberies were not uncommon in the area, but it was extremely rare for civilians to successfully intervene against multiple armed suspects without anyone being seriously injured. Officer Martinez had been working the neighborhood for 8 years and had never seen anything quite like this. Detective Sarah Rodriguez arrived 15 minutes later to take over the investigation. A 20-year veteran of the San Diego Police Department, she had worked hundreds of robbery cases and immediately recognized that this incident was far from typical. The suspects had been neutralized with a level of precision and efficiency that suggested professional training rather than lucky circumstances. Detective Rodriguez interviewed Sarah in detail while crime scene technicians photographed the store and collected evidence. Sarah answered every question honestly but was careful not to reveal specific details about her current military assignments or security clearances. The detective was impressed by Sarah's ability to recall precise details about the sequence of events and the tactical decisions she had made during the confrontation. The Kim family provided their own statements, describing how terrified they had been when the two men entered their store with a gun and began making threats. Mrs. Kim broke down in tears several times while recounting how the suspects had threatened to hurt her grandson if her husband didn't empty the cash register quickly enough. Mr. Kim expressed his gratitude to Sarah repeatedly, calling her an angel sent to protect his family. The teenage grandson, whose name was David Kim, was still processing what he had witnessed. He told Detective Rodriguez that he had been certain they were all going to die when the gunman started making increasingly violent threats. David described how Sarah had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and neutralized both suspects in what felt like seconds, though he admitted his perception of time had been distorted by fear and adrenaline. Paramedics arrived to treat the injured suspects, who required immediate medical attention before they could be transported to jail. The first suspect, later identified as Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old with multiple prior arrests for armed robbery, had suffered a broken wrist and several bruised ribs from his impact with the floor and displays. The second suspect, 24-year-old Dwayne Mitchell, had a severely broken nose and a concussion from the knee strike to his face. Both suspects were eventually transported to the hospital under police guard, where they would receive treatment before being formally booked on charges of armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and terrorist threats. Their criminal histories revealed extensive records of violent crimes, including several cases where they had seriously injured store clerks and customers during previous robberies. Detective Rodriguez's investigation revealed that Thompson and Mitchell had been targeting small family-owned businesses throughout the San Diego area for several months. Their pattern of operation involved selecting stores with minimal security and elderly or immigrant owners who might be less likely to resist or report crimes to authorities. The convenience store robbery had been their 6th attack in 2 months. Security camera footage from neighboring businesses showed the suspects conducting surveillance on Kim's Market for over an hour before entering the store. They had waited for the evening shift change at a nearby restaurant to ensure fewer potential witnesses would be in the area during their robbery. Their careful planning made Sarah's intervention even more significant, as the suspects had clearly expected an easy target. The pistol recovered from the scene was traced back to a burglary in Riverside County 6 months earlier, where Thompson had broken into a gun collector's home and stolen several firearms. Ballistics testing would later link the weapon to 2 other armed robberies in different jurisdictions, providing prosecutors with additional charges they could file against both suspects. News of the incident spread quickly through the local law enforcement community. Word of a Navy SEAL single-handedly stopping an armed robbery created considerable interest among police officers who were familiar with the military's elite special operations units. Several detectives who had worked with military personnel in joint operations expressed amazement at Sarah's ability to neutralize two armed suspects without any collateral damage. The investigation took several hours to complete, during which time Sarah remained at the scene to answer questions and provide additional details as needed. Her commanding officer, Captain James Morrison, arrived at the store after being notified by Detective Rodriguez about one of his personnel being involved in a significant civilian incident. Captain Morrison was a 22-year Navy veteran who had worked with SEAL teams for over a decade. He understood the implications of having one of his operators involved in a high-profile civilian incident, both from a public relations perspective and in terms of maintaining operational security for ongoing missions. However, he was also proud of Sarah's actions in protecting innocent civilians when faced with a dangerous situation. The conversation between Sarah and Captain Morrison was professional but warm, with the captain expressing his support for her actions while also ensuring she understood the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries between her military service and civilian life. They discussed the incident report that would need to be filed with Naval Special Warfare Command and the potential media attention that might result from the story. Local news crews began arriving at the scene as word of the unusual robbery spread through police scanner traffic and social media posts from witnesses. Detective Rodriguez worked to control the flow of information to reporters while protecting Sarah's identity and operational security. The decision was made to refer to her only as an off-duty military member in official statements to the press. The Kim family was understandably shaken by their ordeal but extremely grateful for Sarah's intervention. Mr. Kim insisted on giving her free groceries for a year, an offer she politely declined while accepting their heartfelt thanks. Mrs. Kim pressed a small jade bracelet into Sarah's hands, explaining that it had been blessed for protection and that she wanted Sarah to have it as a token of their appreciation. David Kim, who was a senior in high school and planning to attend college the following year, told Sarah that witnessing her courage had inspired him to consider military service after graduation. Sarah encouraged his interest while emphasizing the importance of finishing his education first and carefully researching all the military career options available to him. As the evening wore on, Sarah's teammates from SEAL Team 5 began arriving at the scene to check on their colleague and offer support. The tight-knit nature of special operations units meant that when one member was involved in a significant incident, the entire team took an interest in ensuring everything was handled properly. Jake Thompson, Sarah's swim buddy and closest friend on the team, arrived with Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez and 2 other team members. They had heard about the incident through unofficial channels and wanted to make sure Sarah was okay and didn't need any assistance dealing with the aftermath. The presence of her teammates provided Sarah with emotional support during what had been an intense and stressful evening. The SEAL team members were impressed but not surprised by Sarah's performance during the robbery. They had trained alongside her for months and had witnessed her skills in various combat scenarios. What impressed them most was her decision-making under pressure and her ability to protect innocent civilians while neutralizing threats without causing unnecessary harm to the suspects. Chief Rodriguez spoke briefly with Captain Morrison about the incident, expressing his pride in Sarah's actions while also discussing the potential impact on team operations. Both leaders agreed that Sarah had acted appropriately and professionally throughout the incident, and that her actions reflected positively on Naval Special Warfare Command and the Navy as a whole. The crime scene was finally cleared around midnight, nearly 4 hours after the initial 911 call. The Kim family was able to reopen their store the following day, though they installed additional security measures including panic buttons and improved lighting around the building perimeter. The incident had traumatized them, but they were determined not to let criminals drive them out of business. Sarah returned to base with her teammates, where they debriefed the incident informally over coffee in the team room. The conversation focused on tactical lessons learned and how civilian interventions differed from military operations in terms of rules of engagement and acceptable levels of force. The discussion was educational for the entire team, as few of them had experience with civilian law enforcement procedures. The following morning brought renewed media attention as local news stations picked up the story of the heroic military member who had stopped the armed robbery. Captain Morrison worked with Navy public affairs officials to manage the story while protecting Sarah's identity and maintaining operational security for the SEAL team. Requests for interviews came from several national news outlets, but the decision was made to limit Sarah's media exposure to protect her ability to continue her military service without unnecessary attention. A single interview was arranged with a local television station, during which Sarah appeared in civilian clothes with her face partially obscured to protect her identity. During the interview, Sarah emphasized that her actions were simply the result of good training and a sense of responsibility to protect innocent people when possible. She deflected praise for her individual heroism and instead highlighted the teamwork and preparation that made such interventions possible. The interviewer was impressed by her humility and professionalism. The suspects, Thompson and Mitchell, were formally charged with MU 3 weeks after the convenience store incident. Sarah's life had returned to its normal routine of intense training exercises and preparation for overseas deployment. SEAL Team 5 was scheduled to deploy to Southeast Asia in 2 months, and the team was working through advanced close-quarters combat scenarios and hostage rescue simulations. The skills Sarah had demonstrated during the robbery were exactly the ones they would need in their upcoming mission. The legal case against Thompson and Mitchell was proceeding smoothly through the court system, with both defendants remaining in custody on high bail amounts due to their flight risk and extensive criminal histories. Sarah had been subpoenaed to testify at their trial, scheduled for the following month, where her account of the incident would be crucial for the prosecution's case. Detective Rodriguez had kept Sarah informed about the investigation's progress, including the discovery that the 2 suspects had been linked to several other violent crimes throughout Southern California. The gun recovered from the convenience store had been used in at least 3 other armed robberies, and investigators were building cases against Thompson and Mitchell for multiple additional charges. Sarah's commanding officers had completed their review of her actions during the incident, concluding that she had acted appropriately and in accordance with both military values and civilian law. The official report praised her decision-making under pressure and her ability to protect innocent civilians while minimizing harm to all parties involved, including the suspects themselves. The story had generated significant positive media coverage for the Navy and Naval Special Warfare Command, with several articles highlighting the dedication and training of America's elite military units. Recruitment offices reported increased interest from young people inspired by Sarah's example of service and courage in protecting others. However, not everyone was pleased with the attention the incident had received. 3 weeks after the robbery, Sarah began noticing unusual activity around her apartment complex and the base where she trained. Small things at first, the same unfamiliar faces appearing in different locations, cars parked in unusual spots with occupants who seemed to be watching rather than waiting for someone. Her SEAL training had made Sarah extremely observant of her surroundings, a skill that proved invaluable both in combat zones and civilian environments. She began documenting the suspicious activity, taking note of license plate numbers, physical descriptions of potential surveillance personnel, and patterns in their behavior that might indicate coordinated activity. The situation escalated when Sarah discovered that someone had attempted to break into her apartment while she was at the base for training. The intruder had been careful and professional, leaving minimal evidence of their presence, but Sarah's attention to detail allowed her to detect subtle signs that someone had searched through her belongings. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, which suggested the break-in had been about gathering information rather than theft. Sarah immediately reported the incident to base security and Detective Rodriguez, who treated the break-in seriously given the high-profile nature of the robbery case and the potential for retaliation by associates of the convicted suspects. The detective arranged for increased patrol coverage around Sarah's neighborhood while investigators processed the crime scene for evidence. The investigation into the break-in revealed that the intruder had been highly skilled, using professional lockpicking tools and techniques to gain entry without triggering the apartment complex's security system. This level of sophistication suggested the incident was not random but rather a targeted operation by someone with significant resources and training. Captain Morrison called Sarah into his office to discuss the security concerns and potential threats to her safety. As a SEAL team leader, he had extensive experience with operational security and the various ways that military personnel could become targets for criminal organizations, foreign intelligence services, or domestic extremist groups seeking revenge for military operations. The conversation was frank and direct, with Captain Morrison explaining that Sarah's high-profile involvement in stopping the robbery had potentially made her a target for criminal associates of Thompson and Mitchell, as well as other criminal organizations who might want to send a message about interfering with their operations. The break-in suggested that someone was gathering intelligence for a more serious attack. Sarah's teammates rallied around her, implementing informal security measures to ensure she was never alone and vulnerable to attack. Jake Thompson and Chief Rodriguez coordinated with other team members to provide escort services when Sarah traveled between the base and her apartment, while also conducting counter-surveillance operations to identify any ongoing threats. The team's protective measures reflected the close bonds that existed between SEAL operators and their commitment to never leaving a teammate in danger. Sarah had put herself at risk to protect innocent civilians, and now her brothers in arms were determined to protect her from any potential retaliation for her heroic actions. Detective Rodriguez's investigation into the break-in led her to discover connections between Thompson and Mitchell and a larger criminal organization operating throughout Southern California. This organization, led by a man named Victor Castellanos, specialized in armed robberies targeting small businesses and had a reputation for violent retaliation against anyone who interfered with their operations. Castellanos was a 45-year-old career criminal with convictions dating back 25 years, including charges for murder, armed robbery, drug trafficking, and witness intimidation. He had been operating criminal enterprises throughout Southern California for over a decade, building a network of associates who carried out robberies, drug deals, and other violent crimes under his direction. Intelligence gathered by Detective Rodriguez indicated that Castellanos viewed Sarah's intervention in the convenience store robbery as a personal affront to his organization's reputation. In the criminal underworld, allowing such interference to go unanswered could encourage others to resist his operations and potentially undermine his authority over his criminal network. The detective briefed Sarah on Castellanos and his organization, explaining the potential threats she faced and the resources that law enforcement could provide for her protection. However, the police department's ability to provide around-the-clock protection was limited, particularly given the budget constraints and competing demands for their services throughout the city. Sarah appreciated the information and protection efforts, but she also understood that her military training and skills made her better equipped than most civilians to handle potential threats from criminal organizations. She began varying her routines, changing routes between locations, and implementing other security measures designed to make it difficult for potential attackers to predict her movements. The situation intensified when surveillance cameras at a shopping center near the naval base captured footage of known Castellanos associates conducting apparent reconnaissance on Sarah's movements. The video showed two men following her at a distance as she shopped for groceries, carefully documenting her routine and identifying potential opportunities for an attack. This evidence prompted Captain Morrison to authorize enhanced security measures for Sarah, including the assignment of armed military police escorts for her movements off base and coordination with local law enforcement for increased patrol coverage in areas where she spent time. The Navy took threats against its personnel seriously, particularly when those threats resulted from actions taken to protect civilian lives. Detective Rodriguez worked with federal authorities to investigate Castellanos and his organization more thoroughly, hoping to gather enough evidence to arrest him and his associates before they could carry out any attacks against Sarah. The FBI's Organized Crime Task Force had been investigating Castellanos for several years but had struggled to build prosecutable cases against him due to his careful operational security. Sarah's case provided new opportunities for law enforcement to gather intelligence on Castellanos and his network, particularly if they attempted to carry out surveillance or attacks against a military target. Federal authorities were prepared to use significant resources to protect Sarah while simultaneously building cases against the criminal organization that threatened her. The psychological pressure of being targeted by a criminal organization was significant, but Sarah drew on her military training to maintain focus and effectiveness despite the stress. SEAL training included extensive instruction on operating under pressure and managing fear in high-threat environments, skills that proved valuable in civilian contexts as well as military operations. Her teammates provided crucial emotional support during this difficult period, sharing their own experiences with threats and dangerous situations while offering practical advice on security measures and threat assessment. The team's solidarity and mutual support helped Sarah maintain her mental and emotional balance despite the ongoing security concerns. The situation reached a critical point when Detective Rodriguez received intelligence indicating that Castellanos was planning to escalate his campaign against Sarah from surveillance and intimidation to direct violence. Informants within the criminal organization reported that plans were being made for a kidnapping or assassination attempt designed to send a message to anyone who might consider interfering with the organization's operations. This intelligence prompted an emergency meeting between Sarah, Captain Morrison, Detective Rodriguez, and federal law enforcement officials to discuss immediate protective measures and potential courses of action. The group needed to balance Sarah's safety with operational security requirements and the ongoing investigation into Castellanos and his criminal network. The meeting resulted in the decision to relocate Sarah temporarily to secure housing on the naval base, where military security personnel could provide better protection while federal authorities worked to arrest Castellanos and his key associates. This relocation would disrupt Sarah's normal routine and training schedule, but it was deemed necessary given the credible threats against her life. Sarah accepted the security arrangements while also requesting permissio 5 days after Sarah's relocation to secure base housing. Federal law enforcement received intelligence that Castellanos was planning an immediate strike against her. An informant within the criminal organization reported that the plan involved a coordinated attack using multiple vehicles and heavily armed associates, designed to overwhelm security measures and successfully carry out either a kidnapping or assassination. The intelligence indicated that Castellanos had grown impatient with surveillance and intimidation tactics, deciding that a direct attack would be more effective in sending his intended message to law enforcement and potential witnesses. His organization had acquired military-grade weapons and equipment, including body armor and communications gear, suggesting they were prepared for a prolonged confrontation with security forces. Detective Rodriguez immediately contacted Captain Morrison and federal authorities to share this critical information and coordinate an immediate response. The threat level was upgraded to imminent danger, prompting the activation of additional security protocols and the deployment of tactical teams from multiple agencies to protect Sarah and neutralize the threat. The FBI's hostage rescue team was placed on standby, while local SWAT units were briefed on the situation and positioned strategically around the naval base and surrounding areas. Military police increased their patrol frequency and established additional checkpoints at all base access points, creating multiple layers of security designed to detect and intercept any approaching threats. Sarah was briefed on the escalating situation and the protective measures being implemented on her behalf. However, she proposed an alternative approach that would potentially end the threat more definitively while providing law enforcement with opportunities to arrest Castellanos and dismantle his entire criminal organization. Her proposal involved using herself as bait to draw Castellanos and his associates into a carefully prepared ambush where they could be captured or neutralized without endangering innocent civilians. The plan would require precise coordination between military and law enforcement units, but it offered the best chance of ending the threat permanently while gathering intelligence on the criminal organization's structure and operations. Captain Morrison was initially reluctant to approve such a high-risk operation, given his responsibility for Sarah's safety and the potential for the plan to go wrong in numerous ways. However, he recognized that her SEAL training and combat experience made her uniquely qualified to participate in such an operation, and that passive protective measures might only delay rather than eliminate the threat. Federal authorities were intrigued by Sarah's proposal but insisted on extensive planning and coordination to ensure the operation's success while minimizing risks to all personnel involved. The FBI's tactical teams had experience with similar operations, but the involvement of a criminal organization with military-grade weapons and the proximity to a naval installation created unique challenges. The planning session brought together representatives from SEAL Team 5, FBI tactical units, local law enforcement, military police, and intelligence analysts familiar with Castellanos and his organization. The group needed to develop a comprehensive operation that would neutralize the criminal threat while maintaining operational security and minimizing collateral damage. Sarah's role in the operation would be crucial but carefully controlled, with multiple backup plans and abort procedures designed to extract her safely if the situation deteriorated. Her teammates insisted on participating directly in the operation, providing overwatch and support that would supplement the federal law enforcement response. The plan that emerged involved creating an apparent vulnerability in Sarah's security routine that would provide Castellanos with what appeared to be an opportunity to attack. In reality, the vulnerability would be a carefully orchestrated trap with tactical teams positioned to respond immediately when the criminals made their move. The operation would take place during Sarah's scheduled court appearance to testify against Thompson and Mitchell, an event that Castellanos' organization was already planning to target. By appearing to provide inadequate security for this public appearance, law enforcement hoped to draw the criminals into attacking at a time and place where tactical teams could respond effectively. Sarah would wear concealed body armor and communications equipment during the court appearance, allowing tactical teams to monitor her condition and respond instantly to any threats. Plainclothes officers and federal agents would be positioned throughout the courthouse and surrounding area, ready to engage any attackers while protecting Sarah and civilian bystanders. SEAL Team 5 would provide overwatch from concealed positions around the courthouse, with Chief Rodriguez coordinating their involvement through military liaison officers working with the FBI Tactical Command. The team's experience with precision shooting and close-quarters combat would augment law enforcement capabilities while ensuring Sarah had backup from personnel she trusted completely. The courthouse was selected as the operational site because it offered excellent tactical advantages for the defending forces while limiting the criminals' options for escape or creating collateral damage. Multiple agencies had personnel familiar with the building's layout, and security measures could be enhanced without appearing unusual to potential attackers conducting surveillance. Intelligence analysts worked around the clock to monitor Castellanos and his associates, tracking their movements and communications to determine when and how they planned to attack. Electronic surveillance revealed that the criminal organization was indeed planning to target Sarah during her court appearance, confirming that the tactical plan would likely succeed in drawing them into the prepared ambush. The night before the operation, Sarah met with her teammates for a final briefing and equipment check. The mood was serious but confident, with each team member understanding their role in protecting their colleague while helping to neutralize a significant criminal threat. Their preparation included contingency planning for various scenarios and communication protocols for coordinating with law enforcement units. Chief Rodriguez emphasized the importance of precise shooting and target identification during the operation, given the presence of civilian bystanders and law enforcement personnel in the operational area. Each SEAL sniper was assigned specific fields of fire and backup targets to ensure comprehensive coverage while avoiding any possibility of friendly fire incidents. Sarah spent the evening before the operation reviewing her testimony and mentally preparing for what would likely be a high-stress confrontation with armed criminals. Her SEAL training had included extensive instruction on managing fear and maintaining performance under pressure, skills that would be crucial for the operation's success. The morning of the operation began with final coordination meetings between all participating agencies and units. Weather conditions were favorable, with clear skies and minimal wind that would support precision shooting if required. Intelligence updates indicated that Castellanos and at least 6 associates were preparing to move toward the courthouse area. Sarah departed the naval base in an apparently routine convoy consisting of 2 unmarked vehicles with visible security personnel, designed to appear adequate for protecting a witness but insufficient to deter a determined attack by a well-equipped criminal organization. The convoy's route and timing had been carefully planned to provide multiple opportunities for tactical teams to respond to any attack. Surveillance teams reported that Castellanos and his associates had deployed to positions around the courthouse area, confirming that they planned to attack during Sarah's arrival or departure from the building. The criminals had positioned multiple vehicles for the attack and escape, with heavily armed personnel ready to engage security forces and capture or kill their target. As Sarah's convoy approached the courthouse, radio communications between tactical units intensified as final preparations were made for the expected attack. Every participating agency understood their role in the operation, and abort procedures were established in case the situation developed differently than anticipated. The attack began when Sarah's convoy stopped at a traffic light 3 blocks from the courthouse, exactly as intelligence analysts had predicted based on the criminals' positioning and surveillance activities. Two stolen pickup trucks accelerated from side streets toward the convoy while masked gunmen opened fire with automatic weapons, attempting to disable the security vehicles and create chaos. Sarah's training kicked in automatically as bullets shattered the windows of her vehicle and security personnel began returning fire. She immediately moved to a protected position within the armored vehicle while maintaining communication with Tactical Command and her SEAL teammates positioned around the area. The FBI tactical response was swift and overwhelming, with teams converging on the attack site from multiple directions within seconds of the first shots being fired. However, Castellanos and his associates had prepared for a significant fight, deploying smoke grenades and pursuing their attack with military-style tactics and heavy weapons. Chief Rodriguez and his SEAL snipers engaged targets from their overwatch positions, taking precise shots that eliminated several attackers while avoiding any risk to civilians or law enforcement personnel. Their superior training and equipment gave them significant advantages over the criminals, despite the latter's military-grade weapons and body armor. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes, but the intensity was extraordinary as automatic weapons fire echoed between downtown buildings and tactical teams maneuvered to neutralize the criminal threat. Sarah remained in her protected position but provided tactical intelligence to responding units based on her observations of the attackers' movements and equipment. When the shooting stopped, 4 of Castellanos' associates were dead and 3 others were wounded and in custody, including Castellanos himself, who had been wounded by a SEAL sniper while attempting to escape. No law enforcement personnel or civilians had been seriously injured, though several vehicles and building windows had been damaged by the intense gunfire. Sarah emerged from her protected position to assist with securing the crime scene and providing first aid to wounded suspects, demonstrating the professionalism and humanitarian values that characterized her military service. Despite being the target of the attack, she showed concern for the welfare of all individuals involved in the confrontation. The operation's success exceeded all expectations, resulting in the complete dismantling of Castellanos' criminal organization and the recovery of significant evidence including weapons, drugs, stolen property, and detailed records of the organization's criminal activities. Federal prosecutors would be able to file charges that would ensure lengthy prison sentences for all surviving members. Detective Rodriguez expressed amazement at the operation's precision and effectiveness, noting that months of investigation had been culminated in a single tactical operation that eliminated a major criminal threat while protecting innocent civilians and law enforcement personnel. The cooperation between military and civilian law enforcement had been exemplary. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the deck of a Navy destroyer in the South China Sea, watching the sun rise over calm waters as she prepared for what would be her final mission as an active SEAL operator. The events that had begun with a simple evening jog through San Diego had fundamentally changed her perspective on service and the impact that military training could have beyond traditional combat operations. The successful conclusion of the Castellanos case had brought Sarah recognition throughout the naval special warfare community, though she remained characteristically humble about her role in protecting the Kim family and dismantling a dangerous criminal organization. Her actions had been studied as a case example in military training programs, demonstrating how SEAL skills could be applied effectively in civilian law enforcement scenarios. The trial of Thompson and Mitchell had concluded with both defendants receiving life sentences without parole, thanks in large part to Sarah's testimony and the evidence collected during their arrest. The Kim family had attended the sentencing hearing, expressing their continued gratitude for Sarah's intervention and their relief that the men who had terrorized them would never be released from prison. Castellanos had also been convicted on multiple charges including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, weapons trafficking, and leading a criminal enterprise. His conviction had effectively dismantled one of Southern California's most dangerous criminal organizations, with dozens of associates arrested and prosecuted based on evidence recovered during the courthouse operation. Sarah's current deployment with SEAL Team 5 was conducting maritime security operations in support of international shipping lanes, working to counter piracy and terrorist threats in one of the world's most strategically important waterways. The mission combined traditional military skills with law enforcement techniques, reflecting the evolving nature of special operations in the modern world. Her experience with the convenience store robbery and subsequent criminal investigation had proven invaluable during the deployment, as the team frequently worked with international law enforcement agencies and civilian maritime security companies. Sarah's understanding of civilian police procedures and legal requirements had made her an effective liaison between military and civilian organizations. The team had successfully interdicted 3 piracy attempts during their 4-month deployment, capturing over 20 suspected pirates and recovering millions of dollars worth of stolen cargo and vessels. Their operations had been conducted in coordination with multiple international navies and law enforcement agencies, demonstrating the importance of interagency cooperation that Sarah had experienced firsthand in San Diego. Chief Rodriguez, who had been promoted to Master Chief during the deployment, frequently consulted with Sarah on tactical planning for operations that involved civilian vessels and potential hostages. Her experience in protecting innocent civilians while neutralizing armed threats had become a valuable resource for the entire team's professional development. Jake Thompson, Sarah's longtime swim buddy and closest friend on the team, had been selected for officer candidate school and would be leaving the SEAL teams to pursue a commission as a Navy officer. Their friendship had deepened during the challenging months following the convenience store incident, as Jake had been instrumental in providing security and emotional support during the criminal investigation. The deployment had also provided Sarah with time to reflect on her future career plans and personal goals. The intensity of her experience with the criminal justice system and law enforcement cooperation had sparked an interest in transitional careers that would allow her to continue serving others while applying her military skills in civilian contexts. Captain Morrison had discussed several career opportunities with Sarah during their deployment meetings, including potential assignments with federal law enforcement agencies, private security companies, and international organizations focused on maritime security and counterterrorism. Her unique combination of operational experience and law enforcement cooperation had made her an attractive candidate for various specialized positions. The Kim family had maintained regular correspondence with Sarah throughout her deployment, sending care packages and updates about their recovery from the trauma of the robbery. David Kim had graduated from high school and enlisted in the Navy, inspired by Sarah's example of service and courage. His decision to join the military had been supported enthusiastically by his grandparents, who viewed military service as an honorable path. Mrs. Kim's letters often included traditional Korean recipes and philosophical reflections on courage and protecting others, drawing connections between Sarah's actions and ancient Korean warrior traditions. These cultural perspectives had provided Sarah with new insights into the universal nature of military values and the responsibility that comes with the ability to protect innocent people. Detective Rodriguez had also maintained contact with Sarah during the deployment, providing updates on related criminal investigations and expressing interest in Sarah's potential transition to civilian law enforcement after her military service. The detectives department had been so impressed with Sarah's capabilities that they had created a liaison position specifically designed to attract retiring military special operations personnel. The success of the courthouse operation had led to increased cooperation between San Diego law enforcement agencies and Naval Special Warfare Command, with joint training exercises and information sharing agreements that benefited both military and civilian organizations. Sarah's case had become a model for effective military-civilian cooperation in domestic security operations. As the deployment neared its conclusion, Sarah found herself making increasingly definitive decisions about her post-military career plans. The combination of her operational experience, law enforcement cooperation, and educational background had created opportunities she had never imagined when she first enlisted in the Navy 8 years earlier. Her teammates had been supportive of her career planning while also expressing their hope that she would remain with the SEAL teams for additional deployments. The tight bonds formed during years of training and operations together made departures difficult, but everyone understood that military careers eventually led to civilian opportunities and new forms of service. The final operation of the deployment involved interdicting a suspected weapons smuggling vessel that was believed to be transporting military-grade weapons to terrorist organizations operating in Southeast Asia. The intelligence indicated that the smugglers were heavily armed and prepared to resist interdiction, requiring careful planning and precise execution to minimize risks to all involved. Sarah was selected to lead the boarding party that would search the suspect vessel, drawing on her experience with close-quarters combat and civilian law enforcement procedures to ensure the operation was conducted effectively while preserving evidence for subsequent prosecution. The responsibility reflected the confidence her commanders had in her judgment and tactical capabilities. The interdiction operation was executed flawlessly, with Sarah's boarding party successfully securing the vessel and its crew without firing a shot. The smugglers surrendered immediately when confronted with overwhelming tactical superiority, allowing the SEALs to recover a significant weapons cache and gather intelligence on the smuggling network's operations throughout the region. The weapons recovered during the interdiction included surface-to-air missiles, rocket-propelled grenades, automatic weapons, and large quantities of ammunition that would have been used to attack civilian and military targets throughout Southeast Asia. The successful operation prevented potential terrorist attacks while disrupting a major weapons trafficking organization. Sarah's leadership during the final operation earned praise from Captain Morrison and higher military commanders, who viewed it as a perfect culmination of her SEAL career and evidence of her readiness for increased responsibilities in future assignments. The success also validated the tactical innovations she had developed based on her experience with civilian law enforcement procedures. As SEAL Team 5 prepared to return to San Diego, Sarah reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with a chance encounter during an evening jog and evolved into a career-defining series of events that had shaped her understanding of service, courage, and the responsibility that comes with specialized military training. The convenience store robbery had been a random event that could have happened to anyone, but Sarah's response had demonstrated the lasting value of military training and the importance of being prepared to protect innocent people regardless of circumstances. Her actions had saved lives, disrupted criminal organizations, and inspired others to consider military service. The homecoming ceremony at Naval Base Coronado was attended by hundreds of family members, friends, and fellow service members celebrating the successful completion of another SEAL team deployment. Sarah's parents had traveled from Ohio to attend the ceremony, expressing their pride in their daughter's service and her courage in protecting others during dangerous situations. Captain Morrison's speech during the ceremony highlighted the team's operational successes while emphasizing the importance of the values and training that enabled such achievements. He specifically mentioned Sarah's example of applying SEAL skills to protect innocent civilians, describing it as a perfect illustration of the warrior spirit and commitment to others that define naval special warfare. The Kim family had also been invited to attend the homecoming ceremony, providing them with an opportunity to thank Sarah in person and meet the teammates who had supported her during the challenging months following the convenience store incident. Their presence at the ceremony symbolized the connections that had been formed between military and civilian communities through Sarah's actions. Detective Rodriguez attended the ceremony as well, representing the law enforcement community's appreciation for military-civilian cooperation and Sarah's contributions to public safety. The detective's presence demonstrated the lasting professional relationships that had developed from the criminal investigation and joint operations against Castellanos' organization. As the ceremony concluded and families reunited with their returning service members, Sarah began the next phase of her journey with a clear sense of purpose and direction. Her military experience had prepared her for challenges she had never imagined, and the civilian applications of her training had opened career opportunities that would allow her to continue serving others in new and meaningful ways. The events that began with "Any last words" in a convenience store had ultimately demonstrated that courage, training, and commitment to protecting others could transform random encounters into life-changing experiences that rippled through military and civilian communities alike. Sarah's story had become an inspiration for current and future service members, showing that the values learned in military service could make a difference anywhere in the world. Her transition from active military service would mark the beginning of a new chapter, but the foundation of courage, skill, and dedication to protecting others that had been established during her SEAL career would continue to guide her choices and actions throughout her civilian life. The question, "Any last words?" had indeed marked an ending, but also a beginning that would continue to unfold in ways that honored both her military service and her commitment to making the world a safer place for innocent people everywhere. Captain Morrison debriefed Sarah and her teammates immediately after the operation, praising their professionalism and tactical excellence while ensuring that everyone had processed the stress of the confrontation appropriately. The successful conclusion of the threat meant that Sarah could return to normal operations and continue her preparation for overseas deployment. The media coverage of the operation focused on the successful collaboration between military and civilian law enforcement agencies in protecting a witness and eliminating a dangerous criminal organization. Sarah's identity continued to be protected, though the story highlighted the dedication and capability of America's military personnel in protecting innocent civilians. And to take a more active role in protecting herself and gathering intelligence on the criminal organization threatening her. Her SEAL training and experience made her uniquely qualified to assist in operations against cuestionos, though such involvement would need to be carefully coordinated with law enforcement to avoid compromising ongoing investigations. The temporary relocation to base housing was implemented within 24 hours, with Sarah's belongings moved under armed escort and her new location kept strictly classified to prevent information from reaching potential attackers. Military police established security protocols around her housing unit and coordinated with base security to monitor all access points to the installation. Captain Morrison briefed Sarah's teammates on the situation, emphasizing that their colleague was facing credible threats from a dangerous criminal organization and that the team needed to maintain strict operational security while providing support. The briefing included information about Castellanos and his network, helping the team understand the nature of the threats and the importance of protective measures. The team's response was immediate and decisive, with every member volunteering to participate in security operations and protective details for their teammate. Chief Rodriguez coordinated with base security to ensure that SEAL team members could augment official protection efforts while maintaining their training schedules and mission preparation requirements. Sarah's temporary relocation marked a significant escalation in the conflict between her and the criminal organization, transforming what had begun as a chance encounter during an evening jog into a complex security situation involving federal law enforcement agencies and military protective services. The next phase of the situation would test everyone's resolve and tactical capabilities. LTL felonies including armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, and terrorist threats. Additional charges related to their other robberies were filed by prosecutors in different jurisdictions. Both men faced potential sentences of 25 years to life under California's three strikes law due to their extensive criminal histories. Defense attorneys for both suspects attempted to claim that Sarah had used excessive force during the confrontation, arguing that their clients had been brutally assaulted by someone with military training. However, the security camera footage and witness testimony clearly showed that Sarah had used only the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threats and protect the hostages. The legal proceedings would continue for months, but the district attorney's office expressed confidence that both suspects would be convicted on all charges. The case was strengthened significantly by the clear video evidence and the credible witness testimony from the Kim family, who could describe the escalating threats made by the suspects before Sarah's intervention. For Sarah, the incident served as a reminder of why she had chosen to serve in the military and dedicate her life to protecting others. The skills and training that made her effective as a Navy SEAL had proven equally valuable in protecting innocent civilians from violent criminals. She felt proud of her actions while remaining humble about the praise she received from colleagues and community members. Witnessed. Mrs. Kim was crying tears of relief while her husband spoke rapidly in Korean to the police dispatcher. Their grandson was staring at Sarah with a mixture of awe and disbelief, unable to fully process how quickly the terrifying situation had been resolved. Sarah approached the family slowly, keeping her hands visible and speaking in calm, reassuring tones. She knew that sudden movements or loud noises could trigger panic responses in people who had just experienced trauma, so she was careful to appear as non-threatening as possible despite having just demonstrated her capacity for violence. The sound of approaching sirens indicated that help was on the way, but Sarah knew the immediate danger had passed. The two criminals who had terrorized the Kim family were no longer capable of hurting anyone, and the weapon that had threatened innocent lives was now safely in her control. As she waited for the police to arrive, Sarah reflected on how quickly the situation had developed and how her training had prepared her to respond effectively. The skills that made her valuable as a Navy SEAL had proven equally important in protecting innocent civilians during a random encounter with criminals who had chosen the wrong target at the wrong time.